Here we go.
Hey, good morning, all. It's Monday. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. We wake up to a brave new world. 2024 is only a few weeks old, and it's already shaping up to be a wild one. Ron DeSantis is out. You saw the news, I suspect. He decided there was no path forward. Hey, Ron, we could have told you that about 3 months ago, and you could have saved a lot of wear and tear on your ankles with those lifts in your shoes. But he's out. He said he's asked his supporters to vote for Trump, according to a poll that I read this morning. In tomorrow's New Hampshire primaries, the poll suggests that Trump has got 52% of support. Nikki Haley, I think 34%. DeSantis had a significant bump beneath that. Some of that will go to Trump. Some of it presumably will go to Haley. And then Vivek, or however it is you pronounce Mr. Ramaswamy's first name, had a little bit, and that'll go likely to Trump as well. So it looks, if the poll is to be believed, as though we're going to get back-to-back thunderclaps for the Donald. If Nikki can pull off an upset, well, God bless her. But if the polls are to be believed, it's going to be Trump again in New Hampshire, and then we'll focus on the South and, I guess the next round of primaries down there. New York, the New York Conservative Party came out in support of Trump yesterday as well. No real surprise there. But it's looking like it's going to be Trump in 2024. Now, those of you who are regular listeners know that at least one of our listeners here has accused me of having Trump derangement syndrome, because my eyes don't go, "Oh, Donald," and I don't become wet with the psychosexual anticipation of his entering me when I utter his name. I don't like the guy, but I'm going to vote for him. And I'll explain more about that later. But it looks like it's turning up Trump in 2024. Are you surprised, Mike? Are you surprised that DeSantis threw it in?
No, I'm not at all surprised. I'm actually more surprised that that Nikki Haley didn't go before him. But I think in recent weeks, it's been evident that Nikki Haley is going to be the establishment's candidate, and Ron DeSantis has just run a campaign that could not have gone worse, I think, including in his concession here. What I've got on the screen is his video that he posted, where he talks about the race that they ran. He ends up giving Trump his endorsement, and he does quote in this video the quote that is on the screen there: "Success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts." And leave it to X to add context. The quoted words in this tweet do not appear in the phrasing in any of Winston Churchill's books, articles, speeches, and papers, although they have been frequently misattributed to him. They do appear in a Budweiser print ad from 1938. So, just a little bit on the way out for Ron DeSantis. But I think you're right. I mean, this is Trump's race to lose. And I think that Nikki Haley is, sort of an embarrassing candidate to get behind if you are, I guess, a self-professed conservative or registered Republican.
Well, I think that when I heard that Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn Money and a primary Democrat supporter was helping support the Haley campaign, it sort of put into perspective what's going on here. Donald's of an age and with health habits that suggest that he could drop at any point. There's always the ever-present threat of his not being able to run as a result of legal or extra legal means. And the Republicans need to have somebody in the wings in the event that Donald can't make it to the campaign. And Nikki would be that candidate. So I think the Never Nikki tour, the Nikki Neverland tour will continue throughout this, regardless of whether she comes in second for each and every primary, because she's playing the long game, and she's playing a shrewd long game in the race between Trump and Biden, many people are heading for the door. And if you eliminate Trump, Biden or Nikki could be that door. I think she's shrewd. I think she's playing the long game. But let's see where things head. You brought to my attention, Mike, an article that I guess Steve Forbes' group put together, the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. It's based on a couple surveys that were conducted in the fall of 2023 that made me feel as though you and I are downright prophetic. Because it just gave content to what I think is explaining the contours of American politics right now. So these polls suggested that if you're a member of the 1%, the elite, you've got a household income of 150,000 or more. You've got a postgraduate degree. You live in one of the select zip codes. You're about 83% likely to be Democrat. But B, even with your Republican peers in that cohort, you share certain beliefs. And those beliefs are that perhaps we have too much freedom in this country. That in the name of managing our response to climate change, we might have to ration gas. We might have to ration our access to meat because cow farts are bad for the environment, after all. We might have to ration access to electricity. In other words, we might have to manage the world for the sake of human flourishing and equitable human flourishing in such a way as to eliminate the individual freedom that people have to make choices, because often those choices are bad. Now, why do I say that makes us look prophetic, Mike? Here's why. We've been talking forever about the prospect of big data replacing Adam Smith's invisible hand as the means of distributing goods and services in the name of efficiency. What am I talking about? 1776. Oh, yeah, that's the year that some inconsequential document known as the Declaration of Independence was signed. But we're not talking about that right now. It's also the year that Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. And The Wealth of Nations was his attack on mercantilism, the notion that individual countries should manage their trade, should manage their economies in a zero-sum fashion with respect to the rest of the world. Imposing tariffs to protect their industries and so forth. Smith argued that a marketplace of disconnected individuals, with each individual acting to maximize his or her sense of well-being, his or her utility, that free market was the best means of assuring human flourishing for the greatest number of people, and that it was not managed by a government because and this is what Smith said. It wasn't managed by the government because there was just too much to know. The wisdom, I don't want to say of crowds or of the group, but the collective the collective experience of individuals each seeking to maximize their utility function, their sense of well-being, their access to wealth, and to what wealth brings, is best managed, best accomplished in the world by leaving people free to do what they want. Because, and again, I repeat, and this is a premise, yeah, I want everybody here to think about it because it's got chilling implications. There was just too much information for any group of governors to have, and the market could do a better job. That begs the larger question. Let's fast forward now into the 21st century. We have big data. Remember Shoshana Zuboff's great book, which we talked about years ago, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. You're using Facebook and social media for free, and you're generating surplus data, surplus information. And in an information economy, every time you interact online, you leave a digital footprint about yourself, and you leave information about yourself, and your behavior suggests how you maximize your sense of well-being. So this notion of a utility function, each person in the world seeks in the course of a day to maximize their sense of well-being by making individual choices about how to sell their labor, about how to consume the products of their labor. That all that data is shed daily and is collected by individuals or by large data entry or big data entities that develop models about who we are and about how best to satisfy us. And so, unlike the age of Adam Smith, where it was impossible to gather meaningful data about large groups of individuals, now it's not only possible, now it takes place on a daily basis. Here's the chilling part. If there is all of this data, isn't it possible that a machine or a generated solution could tell us how we should best live collectively to maximize utility for all? And isn't it possible that rather than having an invisible hand manage the, in a metaphorical way, the economy? In other words, the invisible hand was just a metaphor. There was no hand there. That was Smith's point. That the collective group the collective effect of individuals making decisions behaved as though there were some hand directing the economy. Now we've taken the glove off of that, and AI presents us with the possibility of a managed economy. And it seems to me that it is the case that you can ask the following question and expect a meaningful answer if you have the right sort of data. How best should we distribute the world's resources such that every person has the minimal conditions necessary for human flourishing, for survival, a certain number of calories per day, a certain number of square footage within which to live, access to clean water, regard for the environment, such that we create sustainable ecosystems. All of these are intelligent questions, and I would posit that they have answers. That some answers are better than others, and that one way to find those answers is through the development of big data. One way to find those answers is through the development of non-government organizations. One way to find those answers is to talk about global norms and the enforcement of those global norms in the world. And if you're going to do that, if you're going to have the assumption that these answers have answers, these questions have answers that are, and that some of the answers are better than others, who's going to enforce those better answers? That's the point of this survey. The Ivy League, the elites, the 1%, believe that they have access to data that gives them the ability to create a set of conditions that would make it possible for human flourishing for the greatest number of people. And let's assume for the moment that they do. Let's assume for the moment that they've got a model of human behavior and a model of human needs such that they say, the optimal price for milk in Toledo should be this, that, or the other thing. The optimal number of miles a person should drive so as not to consume too much resources, depriving it from others, or investment in areas where others could flourish is X. Who's not to say that there are not such answers? And I believe this emerging global elite thinks they have it. And so when you hear people talking about Alex Jones and bitching about him talking about globalism, when you hear people talking about Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum, the kind of talk that goes on at Davos, what you're seeing is the attitude reflected in this elite. And these poll results, Mike, thank you so much for passing this on. It was like a thunderbolt to me. I thought, my God, we're right. This is what's going on in the world. And it explains the context of the 2024 election, and it explains Trump's appeal. Because sorry.
Yeah, I just want to no, you're on a roll, and it's brilliant because you're wrapping it in a larger context and packaging it for people so they can understand a little bit more effectively why we're so preoccupied with this stuff. It's one thing to simply think, this group of people believe this about certain others. Is something entirely different to observe that those who are at the levers of power, right, through media, through politics, and otherwise, do have a sense of self that exudes this level of superiority that they would be best served and best positioned to tell the rest of not only the country but the rest of the world, what the ideal or the optimal strategy for, I guess, human existence on the planet, let alone individual flourishing or the flourishing or innovation within a society, but that these are the metrics by which we can judge this. We have data sufficient to say that the human race will be better off if we allocate resources in these manners, except we haven't yet agreed on what better off or best off even means. I want to take a second here to just not anecdotally, but some of the findings in the survey, some of the discrete findings in the survey are a little I don't know. I like to actually unpack them. So it says between half and 2/3 of the elites surveyed also said they would support banning such modern conveniences as gas stoves, gas powered cars, SUVs, and air conditioning if it was done in the name of fighting climate change. Some 70% of Ivy League graduates and 55% of one percenters said they would also support limits on non essential air travel as part of a program aimed at climate change. On education, 70% of Ivy Leaguers and 67% of one percenters said they would support a candidate who believes teachers and other education professionals, so not parents, should decide what students are taught in public schools. Nearly half, or 45%, of average Americans said it should be the parents who decide. The elites, 70% of them at least, are far more likely to trust the American government to do right by its citizens most of the time, more than twice the national average. Most of the elites told surveyors they are likely to support curtailing Americans' freedom in the interest of combating climate change broadly. Nearly 90% of Ivy League graduates and 77% of the one percenters said they would support rationing gas, meat, and electricity in the name of climate change. Only 28% of average Americans said the same thing.
And hence the appeal of Donald Trump. And I want to focus and frankly, the potential winning appeal of Donald Trump. You know, Dawn, I want to first, and I'll address that in a minute. I'm seeing Dawn's comments. Dawn, you date yourself. I've often wondered, how old is this woman? Okay, so you're in your early to mid 70s. I flunked one course in graduate school in 1971 because I told the instructors the book on mathematic models of society before it withdrew. It was garbage. I stand by my opinion. I understand you from a humanistic standpoint, Dawn, but in terms of metrics and the evaluation of our digital footprints and the ability of big data to model, it's there. It's realistic, and we're surrounded by it daily. Just go to your Amazon page and see what books are recommended based on your prior reading. Algorithms may not govern, but there are those who think they should. And so I want to, what's the appeal of Donald Trump? You know, Mike and I think if you're subscribers to our newsletter, you probably got our most recent one this morning, and in it you'll see there's an essay about Trump, and at least my feelings about him. I don't like him as an individual, but I like him as a candidate. And I like him as a candidate because it reflects the populist impulse to say, I want to decide for myself. I don't want to have the good life imposed upon me. And I think that what we're seeing in this survey result, and Mike, you should put on the link to the study that the Committee for to Unlock Prosperity did, so that folks can see it and read the report that they wrote on these surveys. This them versus U.S. Concept reflects the following. In every dystopian novel, 1984, Animal Farm, Brave New World, Handmaid's Tale, even Lowry's The Giver, which Mike got me to read earlier this year, there is a good society portrayed. There is a society with a set of rules, and that society is governed by a set of a standard of what humans need. And every human living within that society can live a good life within the confines of those standards if they don't, so long as they go along, so long as they don't rebel. But in every utopian or dystopian novel, the protagonist rebels, and they rebel because it's not enough to be told how to live. They want to make the decisions about how to live for themselves. Thus, in The Giver, a young man with extraordinary insight suddenly realizes there's color in the world. But what's more, he loves outside the boundaries of what's permitted, and that love is sufficient for him to trust the future, even though it's unplanned. And I think that's the appeal of Donald Trump. Donald Trump stands in the face of the administrative state and says, hey, wait a minute. Nobody said that government has the ability to tell us how to live, or that we should look to government for a good life or a good society. And if we give to government the power to do that, we're exceeding or conceding the authority for them to determine what the answers are and to impose those answers on us. We don't want that. We want to be able to decide for ourselves and indirectly enjoy the consequences, for good or ill, of the decisions we make. And so the populist impulse is a reaction to the attitudes reflected in this article about global elites. And, I say this knowing full well that I have a child who's involved in AI research in England. I have another child who's an MD, PhD, a brilliant kid, a professor on his way up. And these young men have insights into the world that I don't have. They have expertise that I haven't acquired. Half the time, I don't even understand what they're talking about. But I don't want them telling me what temperature I have to eat my oatmeal at. I'd prefer to set my own stove and cook it myself, even if it kills me. And it seems to me that that's the gamble the American people are making in 2024. There may be a set of elites who know better, who have superior insight, and can manage society in such a way that global equity is best satisfied. And in the name of DEI, we'll all live happily ever after. But if we live happily ever after being told how to live, who's really happy, and who has the significance and the satisfaction of making their own way in the world? And that, I think, is what Donald Trump represents, at least to me, in the 2024 election. And while I will vote for him, notwithstanding his flaws, notwithstanding every criminal and civil prosecution that can be thrown at him, because in the end, there are those who say "Make America Great" is "Make America White." I'm not going to go down the racial rabbit hole. It's just the politics of entitlement don't interest me. But when I hear Donald Trump talking about making America great again, what I hear is him saying is I hear him reinvigorating an old argument that we've lost track of in American politics about the role of government versus the place about the role of government in our society. And the role of government in our society is not to tell us how to live and enforce standards in a better life for a better life, even if that's what the global elite wants, even if that's what the Democrat Party wants. Government is not the answer. It's to our problems. More government might make us better able to satisfy a sense of external metrics imposed upon us by others, but we want significance in our own skins, I think. Morey points out Hamlet's soliloquy is still relevant. To be or not to be, that is the question. When we face the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, we want the ability to decide for ourselves, to choose our destiny for ourselves. And so when I look at Donald Trump's candidacy, I don't see the threat of authoritarianism coming from him. I see the threat of authoritarianism coming from the left. I see the threat of authoritarianism coming from the politics of virtue. I see the threat of authoritarianism coming from the politics of scientific expertise. I'm not against science. I want the option to go to the doctor to treat what ails me. But I also want the option to decide I'd rather have the ailment than the doctor's finger up my ass 5 times a week, and to choose to die on my own terms, if that's what the choice entails. And so I think that, Trump 2024, if you want an answer to what's going on and what the appeal is, I ask you to consider this study by Steve Forbes' Committee on to Unleash Prosperity. More than anything else that I have read, and I've struggled with this since 2016, more than anything that I have read in the last 8 years, this survey explains the politics of our time. Mike, I give you all the praise in the world for spotting this, because it's just a breathtaking piece of insight into what goes on in our country, or what is going on in our country right now.
Well, and it should also give us some perspective on why the social media uh, phenomenon is such an important one, particularly when we think about the development of the young mind, the young American mind, and what it is that young students are beginning to hold dear and being taught are those sort of fundamental or first principles, right? Because I think that it's no stretch to say, Norm, that you and I would have a fundamental disagreement with what's being taught in public education, primary education today, as opposed to when perhaps you or even I went through.
Here,
Go ahead.
Here's a thought experiment, and let's move on to something else. Would you want would you want to sing the national? Would you stand and join the national anthem at the next ball game you went to if it was Greta Thunberg singing it? No, you want beauty in your life. You
Just
don't want to be
well put.
hectored into doing the right thing.
Well,
You want the ability to make your own choices, even if those choices turn out to be wrong. So, hey, what? While we're on the topic of wow, I mean, did you know? Did you know that Israel was behind the October 7th attack on its own people, aided by the United States? This was a false flag operation used to justify the genocidal attack on the people of Hamas. That's right. You heard it here second. The first group to say it is a group called Uncensored Truths, and there's a story in the was it the Washington Post this
yep.
morning about this new false flag operation. Clearly, folks, I don't believe what I just said. I'm repeating what is becoming a thing on the internet. This entity called Uncensored Truth is on Telegram. It has nearly 3,000 followers, and its contention is that the October 7th attack was a false flag. A false flag is a um, what's that all about, Maury? How
How
dare you?
dare you? Just
A
Greta
false
Thunberg.
flag is where you blame somebody for staging an event so that they can get what they want. So, for example, Alex Jones famously fell for supported the false flag, the notion that Sandy Hook was a false flag, and the result of that in the end was denial that Sandy Hook occurred, to the outrage of those who actually lost people or knew people who lost loved ones, and the result was litigation. We've talked about that. I represented Alex in that. False flags are subgenre or a part of the great American predilection for conspiracy theories. And, I don't know where they come from. They're amazing. But the notion that anyone with a half a brain in their head, after watching all of the videos that took place in northern Israel the night of the Hamas attack on October 7th, would think that Israel somehow managed this itself, needs their head examined. And that includes Oakland, California housing analysis, Christian Gutierrez, who gave an interview saying that she thinks it's shocking, and she's now persuaded that Israel did this so that they could clear Gaza of Hamas and the Palestinian people. This is absolute bullshit, and it's garbage. But it reflects the hurt of people who believe it. Many years, I have friends who grew up on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. I met some of them while teaching at Jerry Spence's Trial Lawyers College in Wyoming in the 1990s. And one of them stunned me one day after 9/11 by telling me that he thought the government did 9/11. And this came up in a casual conversation. And at first, I wasn't sure I heard it. And I said, I beg your pardon. And he said, look at the Pentagon. Look at how the plane went in there. This was not. This was a false flag. This was done so that the government could exert more power and more control over us. And I was in Manhattan the day before 9/11. And I was in the shadow of the World Trade Center. I don't know people who died in it, but there was no question in my mind that we were attacked that day. And I never thought for a moment we did it to ourselves. But I asked myself, what would make this friend of mine be so distrustful of the world that he is in that it would come up with this cockamamie theory? Because the guy was smart. He's a brilliant lawyer and a good man. What would make Alex Jones conclude that Sandy Hook didn't occur? I think that people use tragic events in history to accomplish what they want. And there are occasions where people engineer events to justify what they want to do. Maury sent us a note moments ago reminding us of the Gulf of Tonkin
That was
in the
Julie.
Vietnam War. Johnson needed a pretext to establish the conflict. And so he claimed that North Vietnam fired on a boat of ours in the Gulf of Tonkin. Next thing you know, we're off and going. We're off and running. Johnson got what he wanted, but this was really a false flag. This was a lie about events. And I think that what's happened in our world is there is so much going on. We're so bombarded by information that in the end, we don't know who to trust and who to believe. But the notion that somehow we're going to go to Holocaust denial, the notion that somehow we're going to become Hamas October 7th truthers, That's just a bridge too far, Mike. And I think that there's a tendency that people have to want to transform history into a contest between good and evil, and we all want privileged access to what that context means. We want to know where good is, where bad is, and I see a lot of online chatter about spiritual warfare right now and demonic forces. And I'm reading a fascinating book on the history of American fundamentalism by Marsden, which talks about how during the 19th century there were so many theologians who were arguing about end of times, whether Jesus is going to return before or after a millennium. We were either pre or post millennial, whether Christians would be removed from the world in a rapture in the twinkling of an eye so as to be avoided this suffering. There are large segments of the population who continue to speculate in this theological vein. And then there are those who don't have theology, but who still have the ability to transform the world into binary terms, into good versus evil. And the result is that sometimes we end up making these ridiculous assertions of fact in order to justify deeply held positions that are independent of facts. And I don't know what the answer is, obviously, to the October 7th truthers. But I do think it's something to pay attention to, because I think that anti-Semitism is beginning to rear its head in ugly and in institutional ways. And the notion that somehow Israel was behind this to pick on the poor Palestinian people and engage in genocide is sort of a bass-ackwards view of events on the ground that day.
Well, and
Um,
I don't wanna necessarily, because 'cause I've seen this as well, and so I wanna put Don's comment up here because I think this is I think a responsible way to look at
oh yeah,
from my perspective. So the lack of security or failure of intelligence in Israel makes this an easy choice for conspiracies. Has the failure been explained yet? And that is a reasonable question to ask,
it
right?
certainly is.
And
I
for
mean,
that,
that's
but I also wanna make sure that we can define, the purpose of the conspiracy as a bit broader from Israel's perspective than simply the ends being Gaza and what's going on, with Hamas and that conflict. What I would, I think, commend to you, Norm, is a broader necessitation that results from this, that the United States be interested in the area, right? Interested in the region, because we are intertwined with Israel from a military perspective, good, bad, or ugly. And I think that from my perspective is more of my curiosity as to, what was Benjamin Netanyahu's position prior to the attack. What would his motivation have been for delaying the response time, if indeed he was involved whatsoever? And then what has been the collective response of Israel and the public behind behind the recent efforts in Gaza, which are justified by the attack on October 7th, right? So that's an easy place to start. But of course, we've got people all in Rumble and on YouTube giving plenty of false flag references, which we can't overlook, right? So January 6th appears at this point to be some version of a false flag. We've got USS Liberty. We, of course, had WMDs and weapons of mass destruction, etc. Right? Jackson says that boomers spent their whole adult lives being unable to believe that the CIA killed JFK. Right? And so I think, Jackson, you're saying we're way behind the curve here. I don't think so. I think that what you're seeing right now is again, the generational divide of someone being surreally online, that being me, and Norm not being surreally online, right? But this is a way to co-locate around this issue in a way that doesn't push us into the into the, I think, the margins of where conspiracy theories fester. But
you
this
know,
is
but
a direct question as to what explains the security failure in a way that I guess would make people asking the question feel better about the
no,
potential
I
for
get you. And there was a
insanity.
fascinating story in the New York Times, I believe, this weekend about, or maybe it was the Washington Post, or maybe the Washington, or the New, the Wall Street Journal, rather, but it doesn't matter, about the fight in going on in Gaza with Israel, and that that right now, after months of brutal assaults, only 20 to 30% of Hamas's fighters have been destroyed, and that this conflict is not going to end anytime soon, or at least on terms that Israel hoped it would. And one of the generals who was responsible for the assault said, he feels enormous guilt and shame over the security failures on October 7th. And my hunch is that if you look at your own life, and in hindsight is always perfect, And when something goes wrong, you often say, "What was I thinking? I should have seen that." So, for example, with respect to the 9/11, we had young men from Saudi Arabia training, doing partial flight training in Florida. All they really needed to know was how to get those buildings into airplanes. They really didn't need to worry about landing them. How could we have not spotted that? Does that mean the FAA was responsible for planning this? Does that mean that somehow the government or regulators wanted this to happen? No, it just means there was an ordinary failing. History is vast. Managing your own individual life, it's impossible to connect all the dots well every time, even more so in a society. But yet, the desire for meaning, the quest for significance, the hope for righteousness, the desire for justice, the desire to distinguish good from evil, that's a characteristic, that's a design feature that we have. I'll be so bold as to suggest that we were all born theologians. And when you stifle the theological impulse and transform the search for the divine into a quest for answers on terra firma, on earth, you end up with terrestrial theology. You end up with conspiracy theories that often don't reflect the data. And that somehow appear to give meaning to random events, but really do disservice to them, because in the quest for significance, in the quest for divinity, we end up attributing agency to things that don't exist. And that, my friends, is the very essence of sin. And as I've said any number of times, and to conclude on this note, Augustine nailed it. Sin is love of the wrong thing. We need a new great awakening in the United States. There's time to redeem ourselves, if only we would listen to the voice of a Redeemer who beckons for forever, just out of view, but forever in sight, if you would only turn with the eyes of faith. Having said that, Mike, we obviously need to return to these topics. The conspiracy theorist stuff, I was on, my office here in New Haven is filled with books. All the offices are, and the associates occupy them. And I was in one of my associates' office the other day, and my eye caught the spine of a book I read about 4 or 5 years ago on conspiracy theories. I think it was by Joseph Usinski. I'm going back downstairs today.
I guess he's going back downstairs without an internet connection. Earth to Norm. Maybe he'll come back in. All right. So thank you.
Anyhow, tell us,
you just went totally out. So I was freestyling there for a second. You're back though.
Anyhow, enough.
You're going downstairs to read somebody.
Oh, Joseph Usinski, a book on conspiracy theory. We'll be talking more about that, because the birth of this October 7th Truther movement in real time, before our very eyes, after we've just seen the video record of what happened on October 7th, is a fantastic forensic case study on the pathology we all carry within us. And I would call that pathology the quest for answers. And the desire for certainty and the manufacturing of false certainty in the face of insecurity. Augustine once said in the very first page of the Confessions, we'll find no rest until we find our rest in thee, O God. And I think that's true. Placing your sights on earth, on the city of man, will break your heart every time. And these are heartbreaking times. Mike, how do people find us, and what's going on with this newsletter?
Yeah, so the second installment of the LAL newsletter is in email inboxes right now. Every Monday morning at 7:45 a.m., you will receive the LAL newsletter if you are subscribed. So how do you subscribe? Well, you might ask, you go to lawpoddaily.com and you simply begin to scroll, and up will pop a notification there for you to drop your email in and subscribe. If you are also forwarded the email from somebody else, or you forward it to someone else, we will always embed links within that newsletter for them to subscribe. And if you wanted to just find it online, I'll also find it. You can find it online at lawandlegitimacy.com. And this is the second newsletter. So what you'll see in here are items that will not be published to the website until at least a week later. We like to at least give people who are in here early the benefit of the doubt and give them the best stuff that we've got. So issue number 2 is up. Here it is. In this, we've got actually 3 essays from Norm, right? All smoke and no fire, courting chaos, and what we're reading. So please go over there. Law and
I thought you
Legitimacy.
were talking about my essays. Is all smoke and no fire. I
Oh,
wrote the essays. Mike did the headlines. I haven't seen the headlines yet.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So go over there, make sure you're subscribed, and respond. We had a few people respond to the newsletter number 1. Love getting those emails. So thank you to you all who were sending us notes of appreciation, and hopefully they're thought provoking enough to get you to come back and to share a little more. But again, I wanted to just share the website one more time here. The website is lawpoddaily.com. You'll see at the top we've got essays, what we're reading, Every Man's Con Law, and this is where we will begin to build out the American Constitution, the guide, the Everyman's Guide to Constitutional Law. We're going to call it a guided study with Norm Pattis. So right now, you won't be able to click on anything here, but as this website rounds into shape, you will. And we'll also link you to things that we use for resources that we like. So we often refer to essays from the American Mind. We get many of our headlines, or at least the analysis of news, from those at the New York Sun. We talk about A.R. Hoffman and some of the other writers there. So this will become in time more of a resource for you, and maybe a center point for other resources other than Law and Legitimacy, but primarily for us to have our stuff housed permanently and to present it to you in a way that we think shows it best.
Thanks, Mike. Listen, folks, we'll be back tomorrow morning for another exciting edition of As the World Turns. Stay safe, stay warm, and get an umbrella, because I'm told torrential rains are coming.
See you tomorrow, Norm. Thank you, everybody.